Have you ever wondered what it's like to grow up in a world where presents are just concepts that exist on television? Where the joy of other children unwrapping colorful surprises seems to come from another planet? This is the story of a little girl who transformed an innocent confession into the most powerful lesson about gratitude and generosity that the world had ever received. It was Saturday morning in the East Oakland neighborhood, and the small Johnson family apartment was filled with the familiar aroma of oatmeal on the stove and the soft sound of the television broadcasting cartoons. Zara Johnson, at 8 years old, was sitting on the living room floor, carefully organizing her small collection of library books, her only true toys. Grandmother Dorothy Brown, a 72-year-old woman whose calloused hands told the story of decades caring for other people, stirred the pot with slow but precise movements. It was possible to perceive that each gesture carried the fatigue of someone who was raising a granddaughter alone with a retirement pension that barely covered rent and food. "Grandma," Zara said, looking up from the books with those bright brown eyes that seemed to carry more curiosity than sadness. "Today is the day of the event at the community center, right?" Dorothy smiled, that tired but genuine smile she reserved especially for her granddaughter. "Yes, my doll. And are you excited?" "Very much. I've never seen Steph Curry in person, only on Miss Amanda's TV when she lets me watch." How is it possible that an 8-year-old child can maintain such joy in the face of circumstances that would break many adults? Zara had learned to find magic in small moments: a conversation with the neighbor, a new book from the library, or the promise of seeing her favorite player in person. "Simple truths are born from pure hearts," Dorothy used to say to Zara when life became too difficult to explain. And Zara's heart was pure enough to accept her, reality without bitterness, transforming limitations into creativity every day. That morning, Zara wore her best outfit, a light blue dress that Dorothy had bought at a second-hand store 2 years ago, still beautiful despite being a little small. She brushed her curly hair carefully, making 2 braids that Dorothy had taught her, and put on the white sneakers she only wore on special occasions. "Grandma, do you think he'll talk to me?" Zara asked, while Dorothy adjusted the dress and checked if the braids were well done. "My doll, important men like Steph Curry talk to many people, but if he talks to you, remember to be polite and speak clearly." The Christmas event of the Steph Curry Foundation had been announced at Zara's school 2 weeks ago, promising activities, snacks, and the special presence of Steph himself. For most of the children in the neighborhood, it was the biggest Christmas celebration they would have access to that year. It was impossible not to feel that for Zara. That event represented much more than entertainment. It was a window into a world she only knew through television, an opportunity to see up close someone who represented infinite possibilities. During the walk to the community center, Zara observed other families walking in the same direction. Children talked animatedly about what they expected to receive for Christmas, about the presents they had asked for, about the family traditions they anxiously awaited. "Grandma," Zara asked, holding Dorothy's hand firmly as they walked, "what does it feel like to receive a present?" The question hit Dorothy like a stone in the chest. She stopped walking for a moment, looking at those innocent eyes that were asking a question that no 8-year-old child should need to ask. "Why do you ask that, my doll?" "Because I hear the children at school talking about presents they received, about how good it feels to unwrap things. And I keep imagining what that feeling must be like." Simple truths are born from pure hearts. And at that moment, Dorothy realized that her granddaughter had verbalized a reality she tried to hide from herself. In 8 years of life, Zara had never received a real present. "Well, my doll," Dorothy said, choosing her words carefully, "presents aren't just things we unwrap. Sometimes presents are special moments, like the one we're going to have today." Zara nodded, satisfied with the answer, but Dorothy knew there was something deeper in that question. Genuine curiosity about an experience her granddaughter had never lived. When they arrived at the community center, the place was transformed. Colorful Christmas decorations adorned every corner, tables full of free food created a festive atmosphere, and dozens of children ran animatedly through the space, their laughter echoing off the walls like music of pure joy. Zara looked around with wide eyes, absorbing every detail as if she were memorizing a dream. It was the most elaborate Christmas celebration she had ever seen in person. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," she whispered to Dorothy. "How is it possible that a child who never had a traditional Christmas can find so much joy in simply being present at a celebration?" Zara walked through the event as if each decoration, each smile, each moment was a present in itself. It was then that a volunteer approached with a clipboard, smiling warmly at Zara. "Hi, dear. What's your name?" "Zara Johnson." "What a beautiful name. Zara, would you like to participate in the question and answer session with Steph Curry? We're choosing some children to ask him questions." Zara's eyes lit up like stars. "Can I really?" "Of course. You just need to think of an interesting question to ask him." While the volunteer wrote down Zara's name, Dorothy felt a mixture of pride and concern. She knew her granddaughter well enough to know that Zara always asked questions that were too honest, questions that came directly from the heart, without filters. "What question are you going to ask, my doll?" Dorothy asked. Zara was thoughtful for a moment, her small eyes concentrated as if she were solving the most important problem of her life. "I think I'll ask about presents," she said finally. "I want to understand how it works." Simple truths are born from pure hearts. And at that moment, Dorothy didn't know that her granddaughter's innocent question was about to create one of the most touching revelations about inequality and compassion that the world had ever witnessed. What neither of them could imagine was that that simple question, born from a child's pure curiosity, would change not only their lives, but touch millions of hearts and create a movement of generosity that would last forever. Is there a moment in life when innocence meets reality in such a pure way that it can silence entire crowds? When a simple question has the power to reveal truths we prefer not to see. This was the moment when an 8-year-old girl taught an entire auditorium about the privilege of having something many consider guaranteed. The East Oakland Community Center had never seen so much activity. 200 people, including children, parents, grandparents, and volunteers, filled the space decorated with twinkling Christmas lights and colorful garlands that transformed the simple environment into something magical. The aroma of freshly baked cookies mixed with the sound of animated conversations and children's laughter that echoed off the walls like a symphony of collective joy. Zara was sitting in the third row of plastic chairs, her little legs swinging nervously as she waited for the moment she had dreamed about for weeks. It was possible to perceive that this wasn't just common anxiety. It was the pure expectation of a child about to live one of the most important moments of her life. "Has he arrived yet, Grandma?" Zara asked for the 5th time in 10 minutes, turning to Dorothy, who smiled patiently beside her. "Not yet, my doll. But when he arrives, you'll know." How is it possible that an 8-year-old child can maintain such energy contained in a small body? Zara observed every movement of the volunteers, every person who entered through the door, every change in the environment's energy, as if she were a little detective investigating the signs of her hero's arrival. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, something changed in the air. A collective murmur ran through the auditorium like a wave, followed by crescending applause that started timid and transformed into warm ovation. Steph Curry had arrived. He entered through the side door, wearing a simple Warriors t-shirt and a genuine smile that instantly illuminated the environment. There was no pomp or ceremony, just a man walking naturally toward the improvised small stage, greeting children along the way as if they were old friends. "Good afternoon, everyone," Steph said into the microphone, his voice carrying that warm energy that made people feel immediately comfortable. "It's incredible to be here with you today." The auditorium exploded in shouts of joy and applause. Zara was radiant, her eyes fixed on Steph, as if she were trying to memorize every detail of that moment to keep forever. "Simple truths are born from pure hearts," Dorothy whispered to herself, observing the pure joy on her granddaughter's face. During the first 20 minutes, Steph talked about basketball, about the importance of education, about pursuing dreams even when they seem impossible. But there was something special about his presence in that community, a genuine connection that went far beyond social agenda fulfillment. "Now," Steph said, consulting his notes, "it's time for my favorite part, talking directly with you. We have some children who prepared special questions." Amanda Foster, the event coordinator, approached the microphone with a list of names. First question: Sarah, 7 years old. A shy little girl stood up and asked about how Steph had learned to play basketball. The second child asked about who his favorite player was when he was little. Sweet questions, typical of children curious about their idol. "Next question," Amanda said, consulting the list. Zara Johnson, 8 years old. Zara's heart raced, as if she had just won the lottery. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling slightly, and began walking toward the portable microphone that Amanda was holding. It was impossible not to feel that. Something special was about to happen. There was a seriousness in Zara's posture that contrasted with the spontaneity of the other children, as if she were carrying a question that weighed more than her small body. "Hi, Zara," Steph said, crouching slightly to be closer to her height. "What's your question?" Zara looked into those kind eyes, took a deep breath as Dorothy had taught her, and asked the question she had mentally rehearsed during the entire journey there. "Mr. Curry, what does it feel like to receive a present? I've never had one." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a void that seemed to suck all the energy from the environment. Steph felt as if someone had paused time, as if those 9 words had created a fissure in reality where only pure truth could exist. 200 people stopped breathing simultaneously. Parents looked at each other with expressions that mixed shock and painful recognition. Children who seconds before were laughing and playing became quiet, instinctively feeling that something very important had just happened. Steph remained motionless for a moment that seemed like an eternity, processing not just the words, but the devastating innocence with which they had been said. How is it possible that an 8-year-old child can reveal such a profound truth about social inequality with such simplicity? "Zara," Steph began, but his voice failed. "I see on television children opening colorful boxes and getting happy," Zara continued, not realizing the impact of her words, her small voice echoing through the microphone in absolute silence. "And I always wonder what that feeling must be like. It must be very nice, right?" Dorothy felt tears form in her eyes. She had tried to protect Zara from perceiving her deprivation, but there was her granddaughter, with the brutal honesty of children, revealing a reality she hadn't been able to hide. Steph knelt completely, getting to Zara's eye level. When he looked at that innocent little face that had asked the most honest question he had ever received, he felt something break and rebuild inside his chest simultaneously. "Zara," he said, his voice loaded with an emotion that surprised even him. "You just asked me the most important question I've ever received in my life." The auditorium remained in total silence, each person processing the weight of that moment. It was possible to hear the sound of the air conditioning and the distant noise of traffic. Sounds that normally went unnoticed, but now seemed amplified in the absence of anything else. "Can I ask you a question too?" Steph asked Zara. "You can. In your entire life, you've never received anything. Not on your birthday, not on Christmas." Zara shook her head with the factual simplicity of someone answering about the weather. "No, sir. Grandma always explains that presents cost money, and we need the money for more important things, like food and grandma's medicine. Simple truths are born from pure hearts." And at that moment, Zara had verbalized a reality that existed just a few kilometers from millionaire mansions, but remained invisible to those who had the privilege of not needing to see it. Steph looked at the auditorium. Faces of adults who struggled to contain tears. Children who were beginning to understand that not all childhoods were equal. Volunteers who worked in that community and knew dozens of similar stories. "Zara," Steph said, and his voice echoed through the microphone with a determination that made everyone pay attention. "You just changed my life." "I did?" Zara asked, confused by the intensity of the reaction her simple question had caused. "Yes, you did. And you know what else? You also just changed the lives of everyone here." It was impossible not to feel that that moment had transcended a normal community event. It had become a watershed, a before and after, in the life of each person present, a moment of collective awakening to a reality that existed right under their noses. "Simple truths are born from pure hearts." Steph unconsciously repeated the words Dorothy had whispered, not knowing he was echoing the wisdom of a grandmother who had raised a granddaughter capable of touching the world with her honesty. What none of them knew yet was that that simple question was being recorded and would become viral in a matter of hours, forcing a national conversation about child deprivation and completely redefining Steph Curry's life mission. Have you ever witnessed the exact moment when a successful person discovers that their definition of normalcy is, in fact, extreme privilege? When a child's innocence can open an adult's eyes to realities that existed right under their nose. This was the moment when Steph Curry discovered that his greatest victory would not be conquered on courts, but in the heart of a forgotten community. Steph remained kneeling in front of Zara for a time that seemed suspended between seconds and eternity. The auditorium continued in absolute silence, 200 people collectively processing the devastating revelation that an 8-year-old child had made with the simplicity of someone commenting about the weather. It was possible to perceive that something fundamental had changed not only in Steph, but in each person present. That was no longer a common question and answer session. It had transformed into a moment of collective awakening about privileges we considered guaranteed. "Zara," Steph said, his voice carrying a tenderness that touched even the most hardened hearts. "Can you tell me more about your life? About you and your grandmother?" Dorothy stood up instinctively in the audience, as if she wanted to protect her granddaughter from having to explain her situation to 200 people. But Zara, with the confidence of someone who had found someone genuinely interested in listening to her, began to speak. I live with Grandma, Dorothy, because my mommy went to heaven when I was 5 years old. Grandma worked her whole life taking care of people, but now she's sick and can't work anymore. So we live on the money the government gives her. How is it possible that a child can explain such difficult circumstances with such naturalness? Steph felt each word as if it were a revelation about a world that existed parallel to his, but which he had never truly seen. "And how do you spend Christmas?" Steph asked, genuinely curious about what the reality was like for families without resources for traditional celebrations. "Grandma always makes a small cake on my birthday, and at Christmas she tells beautiful stories about when Jesus was born. She says that presents aren't just things we buy, but also special moments we live. Simple truths are born from pure hearts, and at that moment, Zara was giving a lesson about gratitude that humbled any personal development course Steph had ever attended. Steph looked at the Itaewai auditorium, then back at Zara, and felt a clarity he rarely experienced outside the courts. He asked a question that would change everything. How many children here have never received a present? The request echoed through the environment like a brave challenge. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, a little hand rose in the fourth row. Then another, and another. It was impossible not to feel the devastating impact of that moment. In less than a minute, more than 40 children had raised their hands, revealing a reality that society preferred to keep invisible. "My God," Steph whispered into the microphone, the realization hitting him like an emotional wave. How is it possible that this is happening just a few kilometers from where we live in abundance? Amanda Foster approached the stage, tears flowing freely down her face. As community center coordinator, she knew those statistics intimately, but seeing them visualized that way was devastating even for her. "Steph," she said, taking the auxiliary microphone, "we're talking about a community where 60% of children live below the poverty line. Many families choose between paying rent or buying presents. The choice is obvious." Steph stood up, looking at all those little hands still raised, small symbols of a deprivation he had never truly understood. Each hand represented a child who grew up watching others celebrate while they observed from afar. "This isn't right," Steph said, his voice echoing through the microphone with a determination that made everyone pay attention. "This can't be right." He walked to Dorothy, who was still standing in the third row, with tears of a mixture of pride and vulnerability running down her face. "Mrs. Dorothy," Steph said, "can I talk with you and Zara privately after the event?" "Of course, Mr. Curry. It would be an honor." How is it possible that a 5-minute conversation can completely redefine a person's life purpose? Steph returned to the stage knowing that his perspective on success, social responsibility, and true impact had changed forever. "Everyone," he said to the auditorium that observed him with total attention, "I came here today thinking I was doing a good deed, but you taught me that I was living in a bubble." Simple truths are born from pure hearts, and that day, Zara's pure heart had pierced the privilege bubble of one of the world's most successful athletes. "Zara," Steph said, kneeling again in front of the girl, "you asked me a question about what it's like to receive a present. Can I ask you a question too?" "You can. How would you feel if I guaranteed that you and all these children who raise their hands would never again spend a birthday or Christmas without presents?" Zara's eyes widened. "Would you really do that?" "Not just that. I'm going to do much more." What Steph announced in the next few minutes surprised even himself. Speaking directly from the heart, without consulting advisors or calculating financial impacts, he made promises that would redefine not only his foundation, but his entire life. "Starting today," he said, his voice loaded with a conviction that made the auditorium silence again, "the Steph Curry Foundation will have a new main focus, ensuring that no child in this community, none, spends special holidays without adequate celebration." But he didn't stop there. "We're going to create a permanent family adoption program. Each family in a vulnerable situation will have a sponsoring family that will guarantee not only presence, but continuous support with education, health, and basic needs." The auditorium exploded in applause, but Steph raised his hand asking for silence. "And Zara," he said, looking directly at those brown eyes that had changed his life, "you're going to be our first official ambassador. Because someone who has the courage to ask the right question at the right time deserves to be heard by the entire world." It was impossible not to feel that that moment had transcended any normal charity event. It had become the birth of a movement, a silent revolution that had begun with an innocent question and was transforming into concrete action. Dorothy approached the stage, hugging Steph with the gratitude of a grandmother who had just seen her granddaughter's future transform. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for truly seeing my girl." "Thank you," Steph responded, "for showing me what really matters." Simple truths are born from pure hearts. And that day, a simple truth had given birth to a promise that would change hundreds of lives, proving that sometimes the most innocent questions are exactly those the world most needs to hear. What none of them knew yet was that that conversation was being transmitted live on the Foundation's social networks, and in a matter of hours would become viral, inspiring a national movement of generosity that began with a little girl asking about the feeling of receiving a present. Have you ever witnessed how a single question can create waves that transform not only individual lives, but the collective consciousness of an entire nation? How a child's innocence can awaken the dormant generosity of millions of hearts? This is the story of how 9 words whispered by a little girl became the catalyst for a revolution of kindness that redefined the meaning of giving and receiving. 6 months had passed since that transformative afternoon at the East Oakland Community Center, and Zara Johnson's life had changed in ways that not even the most optimistic fairy tales could imagine. It was possible to perceive that this wasn't just a change of circumstances, but a complete transformation in the energy that surrounded the girl and her grandmother. Zara was sitting at the dining table of her new house, no longer the cramped apartment where she slept on the living room sofa, but a real house with 3 bedrooms, a backyard, and a kitchen where Dorothy could prepare the cakes she had always dreamed of making. She was finishing her homework at a table she had received especially for her, using school supplies she never had to borrow. "Grandma," Zara said, looking up from her math notebook, "today is the day of the special event, right?" Dorothy smiled, that smile that had recovered the light lost during years of financial worry. "Yes, my doll. And are you excited to be the hostess?" "Very much. I never thought I would help other children receive their first presents." "How? Is it possible that a child who 6 months ago didn't know what it was like to receive a present was now an ambassador for a movement that had already touched more than 50,000 families across the country?" Zara had become not only a symbol of transformation, but a small leader who taught other children about courage to ask for help. "Simple truths are born from pure hearts," Dorothy said, repeating the words that had become the unofficial motto of the A Present for every child. Foundation, as it had been renamed after Zara's question. The story of that afternoon had become viral in a surprising way. The video of Zara's question had been watched more than 100 million times in 3 months, translated into dozens of languages, and inspired similar movements in more than 20 countries. Newspapers around the world had covered the story, but always focusing on the human aspect, the transformation of consciousness that a child had provoked. Steph had fulfilled every promise made that day, and much more. The Adopt a Family program had grown exponentially, connecting families in vulnerable situations with sponsoring families who offered not only seasonal presents, but continuous support with education, health, and personal development. "Is Steph coming soon?" Zara asked, using the first name as Steph had requested on the first day they truly met. "Yes, and he's bringing a special surprise for you." That afternoon, Steph arrived at Zara's house, carrying something that made the girl's eyes shine. A doll she had mentioned only once, months ago, during a casual conversation. But there was something more. An envelope that contained news that would change Zara's future forever. "Hi, Ambassador," Steph said, hugging Zara as if she were his own daughter. "Ready for the big day?" "More than ready. How many families are we going to help today?" 250 families will receive complete Christmas baskets, personalized presents for each child, and coupons for basic necessities, shopping for an entire year. It was impossible not to feel that those numbers represented much more than statistics. They were 250 families who would experience the magic of complete celebrations for the first time. Hundreds of children who would discover the joy of unwrapping presents. Dozens of parents who would sleep peacefully, knowing their children wouldn't feel forgotten during the festivities. "Zara," Steph said, sitting beside her at the table, "do you remember when you asked me what it feels like to receive a present?" "I remember, and now I know." Zara smiled, indicating the new doll in her arms. "But you learned something even more important, didn't you?" Zara was thoughtful for a moment, that serious concentration she always showed when processing important concepts. "I learned that giving presents is even better than receiving presents. How is it possible that an 8-year-old child understands lessons about generosity that many adults take a lifetime to learn?" Zara had become a small philosopher of kindness, teaching through her example that true gratitude multiplies when shared. "And that's why," Steph said, handing over the special envelope, "I have a proposal for you." Inside the envelope was an official letter offering Zara a complete scholarship to the best private school in Oakland, plus an educational fund that would guarantee her education through university. But there was more. An invitation for her to become the first official child ambassador of the Steph Curry Foundation, with real responsibilities to help identify needy families and participate in decisions about how to distribute resources. "Does this mean I'm going to help you help other families?" Zara asked, her eyes shining with possibilities. "It means you're going to teach me how to do this the right way. Because who better to guide our foundation than someone who lived firsthand the difficulties we're trying to solve?" Dorothy was moved to see her granddaughter being recognized not just as a charity beneficiary, but as an active part of the solution. "Zara has always been special," she said to Steph, "but you brought out a leadership that was waiting to shine." How many times in life does an innocent question transform into a social impact career? Zara's story had inspired not only financial donations, but a fundamental change in how society viewed child poverty and collective responsibility. 1 year after the question that changed everything, Zara was on the main stage of a national philanthropy event, speaking to an audience of 1,000 people about her journey from invisible child to ambassador of social change. I used to think that not having presence made me different from other children, she said into the microphone, her small but firm voice echoing through the silent auditorium. But now I know that asking brave questions is what makes me special. The audience stood in ovation, but Zara hadn't finished. And if you're a child who has never received a present, or if you're an adult who can help a child receive their first present, remember, simple truths are born from pure hearts. And when we have the courage to speak our truths, magical things happen. Steph, who was in the front row next to Dorothy, felt tears running down his face. That girl had become more than a beneficiary of his foundation. She had become his teacher about purpose, impact, and the true meaning of success. 2 years after the transformative question, the A Present for Every Child Foundation had grown to serve more than 500 communities in 35 states. The model created in Oakland had been replicated internationally, inspiring governments and private organizations to reimagine their approaches to combating child poverty. "Do you know what was the most important present I ever received?" Zara asked Steph during a special interview on the 2nd anniversary of her question. "What?" "The discovery that my voice matters. That even a small girl from a small neighborhood can change the world if she has the courage to ask the right question." It was impossible not to feel that that story had created something eternal, not just a foundation or a social program, but a lasting example of how shared vulnerability can generate collective strength. Simple truths are born from pure hearts, Dorothy had said to Steph during that first conversation. And 3 years later, that simple truth had multiplied into hundreds of thousands of presents, thousands of transformed families, and an entire generation of children who learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's the first step toward change. Today, when Zara Johnson Curry, she had asked to add Steph's surname as a way to honor her chosen family, talks about that afternoon that changed her life, she always ends with the same reflection. "I asked a question about presence because I wanted to understand what I was missing. But I discovered that the real magic isn't in receiving presents. It's in realizing that we all have presents to give. My present was my courage to ask, 'What is your present to the world?' And so, a question whispered by an 8-year-old girl transformed into the most powerful lesson a society could receive about generosity, courage, and the transformative power of truly seeing and hearing those whom our prosperity sometimes makes invisible. Because in the end, simple truths are born from pure hearts, and when these truths find hearts willing to act, they have the power to change not only individual lives, they change the entire world, one present at a time.